Welcome or welcome back. My name is Elizabeth. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm really glad you're here. And I hope you like my new October background. Um, During October, I've decided to bring you some older true crime stories that have some sort of spooky, neat detail to them, but these are definitely true crimes. The spooky detail, that's your choice on whether you believe it or not. Today's true crime story is known as the Red Barn Murders. This story contains the following topics: gossip, rumor, murder, possible unalive event, pregnancies outside of wedlock, and babies not surviving infancy. Now, if you're not in the headspace for that, please click away. Totally understand. Not a problem. Take care of yourself. Otherwise, if you're anything like me, you might want to stick around for the ride. Okay, today's true crime story comes from England in 1827 in a Suffolk village of Polstead. Now, this was a really small town of about 900 people, and it was known to be like a little Eden where a simple, happy life could be led. The town was known for its cherries, and there was a festival for that every year. Most men in the town had agricultural jobs. Now, in 1801, Maria Marten, daughter of the local mole catcher, was born. Now, this was not an easy life to be born into. I mean, female, low class, more needs to be said. So, when she was old enough, she was sent to be a maid for a clergyman who would see to it that she received a small amount of education. Maria was said to be highly intelligent and was able to learn to fully read and write, even with her limited access to education. At the age of 9, her mother would pass, and she would then become responsible for raising her younger siblings. She was known in town due to her beauty, and she was courted by men often with higher statuses than she. Now, Maria would have fared great in our time. But back then, when she was not supposed to play the field and she's not supposed to try to find an actual match, I mean, a relationship with a man where she was compatible in all the aspects that are important in marriage. No, back then, she was expected to marry the first man and who proposed to her, and her happiness be damned. Well, Maria was not going to live her life that way. You go, girl. She began an affair with Thomas Corder. Even the simple names I have problems with. Thomas Corder, son of a local farmer, when she was 17. The affair would result in Maria's very first child, but that child would pass during infancy. Well, this was not unusual at this point in history. Their babies often didn't make it out of infancy. So this was not actually, not that it's not a tragedy. It is a tragedy. It's terrible, but it wasn't as unusual as it is now. So after the child passed, Thomas's visits to Maria would slow and then eventually end completely. Next, she would begin an affair with Peter Mayhew. Many people said that she turned to him in the sorrow of her losing Thomas. Now, he was a member of the landowning class. In fact, it was his sister to whom the Corder family were paying rent. Now, the Corder family, of course, Corder family, were was where the father of her first child was from. That's his family. So it sounds to me like the Mayhew family was a little bit above status wise than the Corder family, because the Mayhew family owned the property that the Corder family was paying rent for. This is a town of 900 people, so everyone knew everyone's business, but since nobody's business was illicit or upsetting, it wasn't, it was boring gossip, right? It wasn't salacious in any way. Maria would find herself pregnant again, this time with Peter Mayhew's child. She would give birth to a perfectly healthy baby boy and name him Thomas Henry Marten. Thomas Henry Marten. Please note that first name. This was Peter's child, and she named it after her first lover, Thomas. Interesting. Just pointing it out. Now, the laws at the time in England required that Peter pay remuneration to help with the child's upkeep. And he did. He provided £5 a quarter to the Marten family, a sum that probably rivals her own father's salary as the neighborhood mole catcher. Now, in 1826, when she was 24 years old, Maria began her last affair, this time with William Corder. Now, yes, Corder. We're talking about the younger brother of the person who had fathered her first child. Now, Thomas at this point had passed. He had tried to cross a frozen river and fallen through the ice and drowned. Now, he was 2 years older than William, who she was now having an affair with. And in 1827, Maria came pregnant for the third time. She pressed William, otherwise known as Foxy, to get married. Now, I should point out that this nickname is not the compliment that it is now. Usually when people are called Foxy now, it's because they're attractive. But Foxy was actually a pejorative term, and it indicated how sly and untrustworthy William was. Now, he agreed to marry her, but somehow, when it came time, something always went wrong. He was just stringing her along. The baby finally came prior to their wedding, and shortly thereafter passed. Foxy's family was going through its own issues at the time. The patriarch of the family had died, leaving his wife with 6 children, 4 boys and 2 girls. As mentioned before, the oldest son, Thomas, had died, and quickly after their father's death, 2 more sons passed due to poor health. This left his widow with her 2 daughters to help her keep the home, but only 1 son to manage the family's livelihood of a 300-acre farm by himself. Now, all of this occurred within the span of 1.5 years. Maria continued to push for marriage with Foxy, and finally, he agreed and he set a date. Foxy insisted that they still marry so that the authorities at the time did not come after her for having illegitimate children that had become a burden on the local government. He said it had to be done in secret. He proposed the plan to both Maria and her stepmother, Anne, and all agreed on the parameters. So on May 17th, 1827, Maria was to dress herself up as a boy and meet Foxy at the Red Barn just outside town. Foxy would bring a change of clothes for her, and they would head out of town, get married, and begin a new life. Maria's family started to become suspicious and worried when they had not heard from Maria in several months. Now remember, this is 1827, so getting messages to somebody wasn't easy, and it took time, right? So it seemed that Maria would take things into her own hands. Well, into her ghost hands. Here comes the creepy part. Near the end of the year in 1827, Maria's stepmother, Anne, began having dreams that featured Maria. Maria seemed to be trying to get a message across to her stepmother, and eventually it became clear what that message was. Maria was telling her stepmother that she had been killed and that her body could be found buried under the Red Barn. In fact, she was told it would specifically be in a grain storage bin. On April 19th, 1828, so we're talking January, February, March, April. So at least 4 months it would take her to manage to finally convince her husband to take a shovel into the Red Barn and dig into one of the grain storage bins. And in that grain storage bin, Maria's father would come upon her dead body wrapped up in a sack. The body was pretty badly decomposed, but it was still identifiable. And it was identifiable by her hair, her clothes, and a tooth that she was missing, that would positively identify her. Foxy Corder's green handkerchief would also be found around the young woman's throat. Foxy, it turned out, did actually get married. He married a woman by the name of Mary Moore and was currently helping her to run a boarding house for women. It turned out that Foxy, William, had run ads in the newspaper advertising himself as a lonely heart. It was reported that he received over 100 responses to his ads. Now, this was how he met, found, and married Mary Moore. He was easily found by authorities, for he was still within the same parish. Now, it's really funny to me, the kind of information that survives in stories like these. Now, we know that when the police found him, it was in the boarding house, at the breakfast table. He was in a dressing gown, and he was sitting there with 4 other women. He had a pocket watch out on the table as he was minuting some eggs. Wow, that's pretty specific. And that it survived through the years is it's just funny to me. So at first, of course, he would deny the crime. He would also deny ever knowing Maria at all. However, a search of his house, of that boarding house, found a pair of pistols that had been bought the day of the murder, a letter that had contained warning about the discovery of a crime, and a passport from a French ambassador, which was seen as evidence that William Foxy was planning to flee. Suddenly, this cozy little Eden-like town was no longer known as such. In fact, it had become a town full of gossip and rumors. When the trial was set to start at the beginning of August in 1828, it had to be pushed back by a few days to just accommodate for all the people who had come from out of town to witness this trial. This would be the very first case in which information provided by a ghost would be entered as evidence. Now, the exact cause of Maria's death would never be established, and the reason was because there were too many wounds and evidence to determine which abuse had finally, done her in. There were bullet holes, there were stab wounds. The handkerchief indicated she might have been strangled. It seemed that the stabbing in her eye, which may have been the cause of her death, they realized could have been caused when her father was digging her up with a spade. Like, was this a post-mortem injury? Was this they didn't have the technology we have now. So William would testify on his own behalf. He would tell the story of fighting with Maria in the Red Barn and then leaving in a huff. While walking away, he heard a pistol shot. He returned to the barn and found Maria dead by a self-inflicted wound. He then buried her, not knowing what else to do. He implored the jury to please give him the benefit of the doubt. But they would be gone for all of 35 minutes to deliberate. And when they returned with a verdict of guilty. He would be sentenced to death. He would be sentenced to death by hanging, followed by dissection. Dissection. For the next 3 days, he would agonize over confessing his crimes prior to his death. And finally, he would concede that he had, in fact, killed Maria. He said that he shot her in the eye after they'd argued. On August 11th, William Foxy Cordair would be hanged by his neck until deceased. After hanging for an hour, his body was taken down and dissected. For the rest of the day, until about 6 p.m., witnesses were able to pass alongside his body to view its dissected condition. Oh, humans are wacky. Okay, so the ghost. The one that helped, the one that told Anne, Maria's stepmother, where her body was buried. Any holes in that story? For those of us who might not necessarily believe in ghosts, as far as I'm concerned, the jury's still out. I won't know until I'm dead myself and know if ghosts exist. There is a pretty big hole in this story, if you believe the rumors. Now, the rumor was that Anne, the stepmother, was having her very own affair with Foxy, and that Foxy and she had planned Maria's murder together. It wasn't until 2 days after Foxy's marriage to Mary became public that Anne reported the ghost dreams she was having about Maria. Trixie. Very, very tricksy. Now, that is the story of Maria Marten. Damn, it sucked to be a female back in the day. I mean, even if you were somehow born rich, you still. And this girl did not come from a wealthy family. Your life options were so limited and just so awful. Oy. Yay for feminism. Hey, do me a favor. Stay safe out there. Don't believe everything you think. If you're American, please plan on voting. Drink more water. And if you're able to, call your mother. She misses you. Be nice to yourself. And I will check you next time. Bye.